Welcome to the Lapin assessment. It's pretty late here on a Sunday night, and I'm back from I-24 appearances, from back-to-back studio appearances, very intensive day at the channel in Jaffa. And I just wanted to take a moment to share a few insights with you about where I believe we are at this critical stage in the war, and to pass on some information that I think has largely gotten lost in many of the headlines that focus so often on the micro tactical. And I think it's vital to connect the dots and to zoom out and look at the big picture to understand how these very important tactical developments tie into where this war is actually going. So first of all, I think it's very important to note that according to the Israeli Air Force's own assessments, the vast majority of Iran's missile and weapons factories have been destroyed. This is remarkable. And it's even more remarkable that we're not hearing much about this because the ability of Iran to supply itself, to make missiles, that is the main trigger for this war as far as Israel is concerned. The Iranian military-industrial complex was mass producing missiles. It made 1,000 missiles between June and the start of this war at the end of February. That's a very high rate of production. And they wanted to make 8,000 missiles by next year, which would be an existential threat. And so the fact that pretty much every missile factory in Iran has been hit by the Israeli and American Air Forces is a huge achievement. And this is not something that the Iranians are going to be able to rebuild so quickly. It's going to cost them billions and billions of dollars. And keep in mind that the Iranian civilian economy, which even before this war was on the verge of collapse, with inflation, with people unable to buy food or fuel, they didn't even have tap water. And we saw the Iranians go out into the streets in January, and we saw 35,000 of them massacred because of these economic issues. Now the Iranian regime is going to have to choose between spending a dollar on civilian subsidies or spending a dollar on trying to rebuild these very expensive missile factories, starting its weapons industries largely from scratch. The knowledge is there. It's true that they have the knowledge, but the infrastructure has been destroyed, largely destroyed. And so this is very dramatic because it's the longest effect. The destruction of Iran's weapons factories is the longest lasting effect of this war in terms of their military capabilities. Let's talk for a moment about their missile launch capabilities because I'm always getting a lot of questions about this. So look, the last we heard about this in terms of the percentage of ballistic missile launch capabilities that have been destroyed, we heard that it was 70% from the IDF, but that was um, almost 2 weeks ago. That's when we got that figure. So it's clearly above that. It's clearly much higher than that. And this is true even though we heard some very misleading reports including in CNN with an intelligence source from the US saying, oh, only 50% of Iran's missile launch capabilities have been destroyed. The other 50% are online, are functional. Well, actually, the IDF has made it pretty clear that some of the Iranian missile launch capabilities have been fully destroyed and others have been neutralized. What does neutralized mean in practice? Well, imagine, for example, an underground Iranian missile base with silos that it gets buried under lots of rubble and dirt. So it's not totally destroyed, but it's not functional. Now, if the Iranians start trying to dig and recover that base, then they can try and bring it back online. But here's the catch. The Israeli Air Force is monitoring those targets, and when it sees Iran trying to rehabilitate them, what does it do? It strikes again and either destroys them or makes them even more neutralized. So it's topping up the achievements. And so de facto, it's completely inaccurate to say that 50% of Iran's launch capabilities are operational. They are not. Some are totally destroyed and some are neutralized. And those neutralized ones that the Iranians try to recover are targeted again. And then they're either destroyed or they're made even more incapacitated. Whichever way you look at it, the big majority of Iran's missile launch capabilities have been taken offline. And to suggest otherwise is simply to try and play with the data. Maybe it's for political ads, who knows? So a lot of people then ask, how can the Iranians still be firing if the achievements are so widespread in scope? And the answer to that is pretty simple once you are able to get into the Iranian strategic doctrine for waging war. Iran, even though it's a state, is all about asymmetric warfare. This is the doctrine that it taught its proxies in Hezbollah and Hamas. And this is how it operates itself. What does that mean? It means that even if you destroy most of its core capabilities, it knows how to hide enough residual capabilities like truck-based mobile missile launchers in the mountains. It just needs to hide a few dozen of those. It needs to hold on to a few hundred missiles and pace itself and fire, single-digit volleys every day. So most of its capabilities are destroyed. It's still giving the impression that it's in this fight. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is what asymmetric warfare is all about. It's designed to mislead, it's designed to demoralize, and it's not realistic to expect this war effort to neutralize every single missile launch capability, but we are seeing an unmistakable drop in their missile launch numbers, despite the fact that they continue to fire. There's no question that from the Israeli perspective, overall, the numbers are dropping. The numbers are absolutely dropping. And I'm saying this even though we have a very difficult scene in Haifa this evening with first responders in the Home Front Command and the fire service looking for four people trapped under rubble of a missile that fell on a building, a residential building, multi-story building, and appears to not have exploded. Had it exploded, I think the damage would have been far worse. These are half-ton warheads. Sometimes they're bigger, sometimes they're a ton. So it's a very tough situation in Haifa tonight, and it could have been far worse. But even though we are still dealing with these kinds of scenes, the fact of the matter is that the Iranian missile attacks are dropping in scope. They're continuously dropping in numbers. It's not something we always see or hear about, but the statistics are pretty clear. So what does this mean, if we want to zoom out even further? It means that, from the Israeli perspective, most of the war goals, the immediate war goals, knocking out the majority of the missile program, rolling back the nascent efforts to recover the nuclear program. I'll remind you that the nuclear program was the main target of the last war in June, and it did not recover since then, despite many false claims to the contrary, with people mixing up so many things. One common argument is, oh, we heard that there was an existential threat that was neutralized in June in the last war. How could we have an existential threat again? And this question, I guess it's fair if you don't drill down into the details, but it's a perfect example of how we are living in many ways in a sort of post-fact era, because the existential threat that was in place in June came from the nuclear program, not the missile program. And that nuclear program in Iran has been so badly degraded in June that the Iranians have since not recovered. They haven't been able to enrich uranium. What they wanted to do was to dig a very deep site under Granite Mountain and to start moving their nuclear program there. Those efforts have been stopped. And they wanted to do some secret research and development on nuclear weapons. Those sites have been hit in this war as well. The existential threat from this war came from mass conventional missile production. It's a different existential threat. And that now too is being tackled. So, this is the times that we're living in. If people want to criticize the war, they're going to find any excuse, and they're going to not pay attention to what exactly is being taken out and removed and degraded as the main threat each time. So, look, at the end of the day, we still have the big questions about what's going to happen with the regime. and what's going to happen with the Hormuz Strait. And I'm just going to address the Hormuz Strait because I've talked about the regime a lot recently, and I'll probably talk about it again in the future. I think that the regime's future is not bright at all. I think it's going to face existential crises once this war ends. But I've spoken about this quite a bit in recent recordings. So let me tell you a little bit about what's going on in Hormuz, because here, once again, we have a rather deceptive picture. Uh, President Trump has set his ultimatum for Tuesday night for Iran to quote unquote open the Hormuz Strait. Now, what this really means, if we break this down, is that Trump is telling the Iranians, look, if you are willing to stop threatening the Hormuz Strait, stop threatening the oil tankers, stop threatening maritime traffic, stop disrupting it, then we have the basis for a ceasefire. We have the basis for a ceasefire and potentially more. Now, why have the Iranians said no up until now? Because that is the main weapon that they have left. Their ability to militarily block the Hormuz Strait has been severely degraded already. This is something you won't hear about very often. But there are two Iranian navies, the IRGC Navy and the conventional Navy, have both been largely destroyed. The US has mine sweeping and clearance vessels that are probably operating as we speak in Strait of Hormuz, making sure that there are no mine clusters in that body of water, in that very strategic body of water. Most of the Iranian anti-ship cruise missile positions on the coast have been destroyed. Now, does that mean that the Iranians can't threaten shipping at all? No, it doesn't mean that. They can they can probably threaten some of those ships with shoulder-fired missiles and other kinds of asymmetric capabilities. But it's actually the threat itself. The threat itself is what's preventing the traffic from resuming because the insurance companies are spooked. So if President Trump can get the Iranians to publicly affirm that the Hormuz Strait will no longer be a conflict zone, just that statement would basically enable the insurance companies to once again enable traffic to flow and oil and gas to flow out of Hormuz to the world. And that's why he's after that. And the Iranians, even though most of their military capability has been degraded, and they still have a residual capability that they're using asymmetrically, just their ability to verbally threaten the Hormuz Strait and to get some countries to coordinate with them, to pay them money, to seek their approval, just that in and of itself is a weapon. That is a weapon because it pretends to demonstrate Iranian dominance and control over this strategic waterway and by default over the global energy market. So this is another example of the Iranians employing asymmetric warfare. And President Trump has made it very clear to them, look, if you want an off-ramp, you've got one. If you insist on continuing, and by the way, this really matches messaging we've heard from Israel. Defense Minister Katz saying today, if the Iranians continue to fire missiles at Israel, they are going to face new kinds of targets that will be hit. We'll talk about that in just a moment. This will be the final point. So President Trump and Israel basically telling the Iranians, you've got an off-ramp. If you don't take it, the next stage of escalation is not only the U.S. taking control of the Hormuz Strait, which it is perfectly capable of doing, but it involves targeting new kinds of Iranian targets. So what would that look like, assuming that the Iranians don't stand down? Well, we already got a taste of that in recent days. The Israeli Air Force struck a very important Iranian petrochemical facility in southwest Iran. Why is that important? Because it's a new kind of target, and it's exactly the kind of target that is, in many ways, the most sensitive for the Iranian regime. This site, this petrochemical site, generated for the IRGC $18 billion of revenue just in the past 2 years. What do they do with that money? They spend it on missiles, on drones, and their proxies. Also, this petrochemical site produced explosives for the missiles. So you see the dual use here. It makes chemicals that are used for missiles. It generates income that is used to build missiles. This is the military industrial economic matrix that Iran has woven. This is how the Iranian system works. And what Israel and the United States are signaling to Iran is if you don't take the off-ramp that's available to you now, you're going to lose these kinds of targets that are scattered throughout Iran. Now, there are two other kinds of targets that are closely related, families of targets that could be hit. We don't know yet. One is the internal Iranian power network grid, the electricity grid. That this would send Iran back into the Stone Age. This is a huge threat. And the second is the Iranian oil and gas export facilities, most of which are on Karg Island. Here, Iran could see the U.S. raid the island and take the export facilities, or it could see the facilities blown up. So those are basically the options that we're facing, and all of this is basically a counterweight to the Iranian attempt to hold the world hostage by continuing to threaten Hormuz Strait. So this is essentially where we are. It's going to be very interesting to see where things go. I do think it's important for the leaderships that are involved in this war, the military and especially the political leaderships, to be more upfront about the goals of the war and how far we are in reaching them. Because in all honesty, the goals of the war could not be more justified. This is a war to secure our survival and continued existence as a Jewish state in the Middle East and to secure America's most basic security needs and the world's. This is a completely justified war. It's impossible for me to think of a war that's, more justified in recent history, except, the June War, which is really just the first act, I would say, of the same conflict. And the goals, most of the goals have been met successfully. So we need to hear the leadership say that. It's okay to say that we don't know when the regime is going to fall. And it's okay to say that most of the immediate threats that we went to war to eliminate have indeed been eliminated. That's good news. And if we're not fully there, then the public should know that too. So I think it's important to do that, especially here in Israel, because most of the public is firmly behind this war. But the public, I think, needs to know how far along we are in it, what the options are. And I understand that there's also a need to keep the enemy off balance and that not everything can be transparent. I'm more than aware of the need to keep your cards close to your chest when you're fighting a war. But I think that the public also needs a greater level of transparency because the achievements are huge. The objectives have largely been met. And if Iran is being given an off-ramp, then I think that that's a sound decision. That's a very sound decision. The situation in Lebanon is very different. The timelines are different. I have a whole different perspective there. I'll just say in a nutshell that this is not just another operation, what's happening in Lebanon. We are seeing the entire Hezbollah Iranian shadow state that was built in southern Lebanon being uprooted, torn apart, and dismantled and sent away from southern Lebanon. It's a very dramatic and overdue operation, and things are not going to go back to the way they were in southern Lebanon after this war is over. I'll dedicate a separate video to that, but I really think that it was important that I took a little bit of time to speak to you directly in detail about where the war is, where it might be going, and also how to present this to the public. It's very, very late here, so it's well past 2 a.m. So you can understand how much coffee is needed for me to be able to even speak to you at this hour. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for the next episode. Thank you for your support, and I will catch you on the next recording.